So back on the Fear the Fro podcast, the second time my guest came on last year. His podcast was the most listened to one of the 2024 calendar year. So the reason I wanted him on today, though, was because I saw his name pop up on my Twitter feed yesterday prior to the Cavaliers obtaining DeAndre Hunter. Chris Mannix from Sports Illustrated joins me. Thanks for coming back, Chris.
I'm honored to be your most listened to guest, Bob. I think that just indicates you need to get better.
I'm working on it, Chris. I got to start somewhere. Tip of the iceberg. So yesterday I see you tweet out that the Cavaliers emerge as a front runner for DeAndre Hunter. And sure enough, later in the day, the Shams tweet comes. It's confirmed. He's coming to Cleveland. I guess a good place to start is your reaction to the deal, how you feel it helps the Cavs, how you feel it serves purposes for Atlanta, just your assessment of the deal as a whole.
Yeah, I think it helps the Cavs considerably. DeAndre Hunter was a top target of this team going into the trade deadline. They like his shooting. He's not an elite defensive player, but he's a big body and certainly someone that fits the prototype who could guard most wings in the NBA. He's a young guy, that kind of fits into what they're trying to build both short and long term. So I wasn't surprised at all to see them execute that deal. They were the most aggressive team out there on the market in pursuit of DeAndre Hunter. And yeah, they had to give up some stuff. I mean, they gave up a couple of players that were pretty good for them. They gave up some draft capital that could be useful to them down the line. But this is a team that's built to win right now. They're the number one team in the Eastern Conference. They've taken their lumps in previous playoff series. They're looking to add players that can help them win a championship this season. And I think DeAndre Hunter can be a guy that moves the needle for them. Now, the Atlanta Hawks, they're kind of in a weird place where they look like they're starting to do something of a teardown out there. It's a little odd to do it when so much of your draft capital is earmarked for San Antonio. But, this was a deal for them built more towards the future of this team than anything they're going to do in the present.
Well, okay, I want to speak to that draft capital thing with Atlanta for a second. Where do you sit on – I've heard two trains of thought when it comes to, okay, Atlanta's sort of tearing down, sending out Bogdanovich, sending out Hunter. They lose Jalen Johnson for the season. And San Antonio's in possession of their first-round pick. So there's this idea that they shouldn't tank because San Antonio has their pick. But the alternative to that is the pick's already gone, sunk cost fallacy. What does it matter what you do? You're not getting the pick back anyway. I'm curious if you were in charge of decision-making in Atlanta, would you have approached this differently, knowing that it could impact San Antonio in a beneficial way?
I would not have approached it differently, in part because San Antonio is in the Western Conference, right? If you're going to be – this isn't like Boston and Brooklyn where, the Nets were gifting the Celtics pick after pick, over – the last the mid 2010s that turned out to be, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. San Antonio, potentially could become a team Atlanta has to contend with, but right now the Hawks are light years away. I mean, I think for them, you've got to do your own thing and you can't be worried about the end result of this season. I know that's a philosophy I don't think would be shared by everybody in the NBA, but if you're able to get, some draft picks in exchange for DeAndre Hunter, draft capital in exchange for Bogdanovich, you've got to do what you've got to do in that situation. You can't be overly concerned about making sure the Spurs get like the 11th pick instead of the 7th pick. I don't think that can be at the top of your mind.
That feels like a PR war for the GM perhaps, but not something that fan bases should care about. Now, when it comes to the actual people that the Hawks offloaded, you'd been hearing Bogdanovich for a long time. I don't think anybody was surprised by that. I think people were a little more taken aback that the Hawks would offload Hunter maybe at the price they got, because the reception, at least in Cleveland, is that as I went into this, I like Hunter as a player, but I wasn't eager to see deals put together that would lose the Cavs their 2031 first-round pick or Jalen Tyson, and to come away in a situation where they essentially moved second rounders that got rerouted. And even these pick swaps, they were pick swaps that there's already pick swaps in place for the Donovan Mitchell deal. So really, essentially, it feels like just a straight cash dump on a guy who they think's at a sell high point for an Atlanta team who maybe didn't think they could even get that much, heading into this season. And then he puts forth this career year. I'm curious how you feel, though, about how the Cavs should approach this upcoming offseason. So they get Hunter. Everybody agrees that he can serve a purpose for them. But what do they lose here in a Karras or a George that you feel like? What are other areas you feel like they still need to address or that are question marks for you?
I mean, you really want to address what you lost with George, right? Because, Hunter replaces Karras. You're basically swapping out those two guys. And Hunter has proven to be a much more reliable perimeter shooter, which in today's NBA is invaluable. As far as how they would approach the offseason, I think a lot of that depends on how this season ends. I mean, this is kind of you're going to learn a lot about, what this Cavaliers team needs and how they should be fleshing out the roster around their stars, during this postseason. If they get to a conference finals, if they get to the NBA finals, you're going to say, all right, let's just keep this band together. If they get to the finals, it probably means that DeAndre Hunter, played a decent role in all that. It means that the backcourt of Mitchell and Garland worked. The front court of Allen and Mobley worked. If they get beat in the second round again, I think you have to have a different conversation. So I think it's just too soon to kind of be able to evaluate what needs this team is going to have in the offseason. You really have to see how this group plays against some top-tier teams in the Eastern Conference.
Well, let's speak to that point. How do you feel like this changes anything in terms of your outlook on the Eastern Conference? Do you think this gets them closer to Boston? Do you think this puts them ahead of them in your mind, or doesn't it really change anything for you?
I think it's a positive deal. It improves the team. I think how much closer it gets them to being on Boston's playoff level, I don't know. I think New York's got a playoff level that they could potentially go to as well, but this makes them better. I think DeAndre Hunter in that role that was occupied by Karis LeVert and others is going to be better. I just think you're going to get more reliable shooting, and that's important. The Cavaliers, to me, are one of the most unpredictable playoff teams in this field because they're having such a great regular season. They have so many talented young players. Yet, if you kind of dig down, you talk to coaches and GMs about, the Cavs in the playoffs, there are still the same things that kind of crop up, the big what ifs. Like, okay, when your rotations shorten, as they invariably do, and you're not playing 10, 11 guys like Kenny Atkinson has done at different times during the season, or going deep into your bench at least. How exploitable is a Mitchell Garland backcourt? How exploitable is it having 2 7-foot bigs that don't really shoot threes? Like these are the questions that only a playoff series or a playoff run are going to answer for the Cavaliers, because they're not built in the way that some of the other top tier teams are built. I mean, look at what Boston's doing. They're built, around, long wing players and Kristaps Porzingis in the middle. It's like the same thing in Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City is like a carbon copy of Boston. They've been building out their team over the last few years to have a very similar type of team. This Cavs team, it's kind of a throwback team in a way, to have, the backcourt that they have, the 2 bigs that they have. Now they'll try to incorporate Hunter into that mix. They're one of, if not the most interesting team to me going in the playoffs. Easily the most interesting team to me go in the Eastern Conference playoffs, about whether or not they're the type of team I think that could make a run all the way to the NBA Finals. They're good enough. Donovan Mitchell's a closer. They've got a whole bunch of guys that can score. They play good defense. They're a great 3-point shooting team. But could the wrong matchup also catch them? Maybe not the first round, but the second for sure. I could see that happening too. There's just a lot of variance, I think, with this Cavaliers team.
I feel pretty good about everybody, but perhaps Boston. Even New York, I feel way better than I did before. With Boston, I think the things that I took away from that last game, and Karras had a bad end here before the trade, but he was coming back from injury, a couple of bad games. The things that really crushed us in that Boston game, I thought the defense held up fairly well. I just thought we weren't getting enough on the offensive end. And I thought when you guys in Boston, I say you guys like as if you're still associated with the team.
I am sitting here.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here at the moment in the Boston area.
Well, then you guys. So when the bigs I thought they picked apart when we went with our smaller ball units, when we shifted Evan to the 5. But in the playoffs, it was so encouraging because we didn't have Allen in the playoffs and we didn't have Mitchell for the second round of that matchup. So I thought Evan Mobley looked fantastic in the playoffs, and then we've had a couple regular season games from his early part of his career to this last one. This was one of the worst games he's had of the season in this last matchup against Boston. But my hope is, when Dean Wade is back and a Hunter's back, see, I don't necessarily look at Hunter as a replacement for a Karras. I kind of look at it like Karras was burying the opportunity of a guy like a Ty Jerome, who isn't really a wing. He's more of a secondary ball handler, but that was Karras's role as well. So if it gives a bigger runway to Ty Jerome, and then you're essentially replacing George Niang's minutes with a two-person tandem, assuming they're healthy, of a Dean Wade and a DeAndre Hunter, that's a lot more length and versatility on the defensive end. That hopefully comes with enough offense. I think George took a lot of strays because I think people look at him and they just say, well, this guy isn't an NBA player, but he was shooting very well this year. And for whatever deficiencies he had defensively, I am sad to see those guys go. But one of the other things that comes with doing a 2-for-1 deal is it opens up a roster spot that has to be filled. And that's kind of what I wanted to pivot to was if you look at what they sent out in a LeVert and a George, and you look at what they brought in a Hunter, what would be the way that you would lean in the buyout market? There's been rumors with Ben Simmons. I've seen his name connected. Is there some type of player or a specific player that you would target to fill that 14th roster spot?
I wouldn't if I was Cleveland. I mean, for starters,
you mean Simmons when you say I wouldn't, or just
I wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't. I mean, yeah, you could try to sign somebody that springs loose, but you can count on a couple of fingers the guys that have made impact on the buyout market. It's the hype around the buyout market is substantially more significant than the substance of it. You see all these guys, oh my God, this guy got cut loose and he's available and we signed him to the end of the season. Turns out that guy doesn't play very much and doesn't make an impact in the playoffs. I mean, this Cavaliers team is built on the backs of multiple years being together, developing chemistry. Anybody you sign is going to become a break glass in case of emergency guy. That's what most of these buyout market signees ultimately are. So if it's Ben Simmons, who I don't think is a good fit in Cleveland, I don't know where you play Ben Simmons, and I don't know you can never be sure what Ben Simmons is going to be capable of physically out there on the floor. I just don't see the fit for Simmons in Cleveland. I mean, I wouldn't rule out them going out and snatching somebody up that they think might make sense as that 10th or 11th guy, but that's really all you're looking at right now. Your rotation is your rotation in Cleveland. And I actually think it's sending out 2-for-1. Cleveland, as you know, they play a lot of guys, and it gives more opportunity, I think, for the guys that are there to stand out and play a bigger role. And look, the Boston stuff, like I've watched those Celtics games. I was at the first one they played in Boston. Like they're much more capable this year of beating the Celtics. And a couple things that they do with Kenny Atkinson there. One, I think they've done a great job of trying to run the Celtics off the 3-point line. They're one of the better teams I've seen at, even if it turns out to be like they give up a layup on the other end. Like they run the Celtics off the 3-point line. That is their goal. And if you can get the Celtics 3-point numbers, and I mean attempts, down to the low 40s instead of the high 40s and 50s, you give yourself a chance. And they also, I go back to the first game they played against the Celtics in Boston, where they don't panic when they get in tough situations. Like they chip away at leads. They don't try to get into a 3-point shooting contest necessarily with Boston. So I think Boston's going to be tough to beat in the playoffs. Right now, what they're going through, nobody should give a damn about. Like this is like the what are we doing in January malaise here. Like this was predictable coming into this season. But I think this Cavs team, based on the maturity and and obviously the addition of Kenny, is more equipped to beat them this year than they were last year.
I feel pretty good for the same reasons that you said. I mean, even in the losses, this was a team. That game was god awful the other night. Neither team could make a bucket. The Cavs were terrible in the first half, especially. Darius Garland, the first game of the year, had maybe his worst game of the season, and all those games were contested to the point where it felt like it did. I agree that just emotionally, from the buy-in, from the self-confidence, it feels different with this Kenny Atkinson version of the Cavs. In terms of Eastern Conference contenders, do you see Boston and Cleveland being separate at all from a New York? Do you lump all three together? What would be your level of confidence coming out of the East?
Look, even though the Celtics are behind the Cavs in the standings, I would still rank them number one because I just don't think they're interested in what's happening right now. I've been around them a lot. I was with them on their recent West Coast trip. I've been around the team in Boston. Like, between Christmas and the All-Star break, it's tough for a team that, climbed the mountaintop over 6 years to get up for games, right? Like that championship they won last June was not like the '08 championship where the team was kind of thrown together in 1 year and they came together in the gel and won a title. This team suffered, man. Like they battled through conference finals losses, an NBA finals loss, and to get to that mountaintop, it is really difficult for them to turn around 8 months later and give a crap about a Pelicans game at the end of December or anything that's going on in January. So I do think when we get to March and April, you're probably going to see this team peaking and looking a lot more like the team that went 16-3 in the playoffs last year. So I would still put the Celtics as the top tier team in the conference. And I'd put Cleveland at number 2, but I don't know if there's a huge gap in the postseason in terms of like how I see these teams in the postseason between the Cavs, the Knicks, and certainly the Bucks, who have kind of gotten their act together to a degree, over the last couple of months. I think they're really good and deserve to be considered among the title contenders this year, because we're no longer at that stage where it's like, all right, well, they got off to a hot start. All right, well, this player is playing over his head. No, everybody is really friggin' good in that Cavs rotation. But I've seen it from Milwaukee in the playoffs before, specifically from Giannis, some of those other guys. We've certainly seen it from Boston. So I think you got to see it before you can truly believe it with the Cavs.
Can we talk a little bit about Milwaukee and what they did? I wanted to pivot to some of the moves. I think that's a good place to start because that was a pretty significant change. Middleton was a huge part of that finals run for them, and they get off his money. They get under the second apron. They bring in Kuzma. How did you feel about their maneuvers in terms of how it impacts them? I'm more concerned with the short term because obviously I get the financial incentive long term for the move. But how do you feel like that positions them for this year?
I think it makes them a little bit better. Middleton, because of the injuries, has not been the player he was during their championship run. He is still a good shooter, but he's not anywhere close to a 3-and-D guy. Kyle Kuzma isn't your prototypical 3-and-D guy either, but he's younger. I think he enables them to play a little bit faster. He also has, some championship experience from that year he played with the Lakers. It's a roll of the dice because the chemistry between Middleton and Giannis and Brook Lopez and some of the guys that have been around for a while, you could at least count on that. But I think it was a worthy role there. I just think they need something. They're still, putting Boston as the bar. Boston's the bar for everybody. They're a tick below Boston with the team with Chris Middleton as a part of it. Now you get Kuzma, and look, it may not work out, but I think they've at least given themselves a chance to become a little bit more dynamic offensively, increase the pace a little bit more with that team. I think it raises their ceiling a little bit. So I did like that move for the Bucks.
I liked it independent of just the play on the floor because, like you said, Middleton hasn't exactly been the Middleton that we've been accustomed to, and it's not looking like he'll head back that direction with the age. So to get off such a significant salary, I think the nice thing with Kuzma is I don't particularly like Kuzma as a player, but in an environment where he's not asked to do so much, really, I think that team goes as Dame and Giannis do for the most part anyway. So as long as he doesn't actively disrupt their chemistry in a way it's negative, I think in the long term, that deal will definitely, be better for them because you get into these situations like a Phoenix where you have all these aging guys on these big money deals. And sometimes it's just a precipitous fall. If they can hang in long enough to, maybe strike lightning here and make a run, who knows? Let's talk to the other huge deal. Well, there's multiple huge deals, but let's talk with the top of the bar here, the Luka to LA deal. How did you feel about what Los Angeles did at this trade deadline? Not just Luka, but Mark Williams, the whole collaborative flip out that they did.
So love the Luka deal like anybody else. Regardless of fit next to LeBron, regardless of what you had to give up that might make you weaker short term, you have an opportunity to grab a transcendent talent like that. You do it 6 days a week and twice on Sunday. Simple as that. On top of that, the Lakers gave up a great player in Anthony Davis, but holding on to that 2031 first round pick which enabled them to go out and get a guy like Mark Williams. Rob Pelinka's in the mix for executive of the year. We don't vote for that in the media, but I believe his peers will probably think he's done a pretty excellent job, during the season. So, I do. The Lakers are confounding short-term expectations right now with the way that they're playing. But when Luka gets into this mix, I do think they're going to have a lot of problems getting stops defensively. We'll talk about Mark Williams in a second, but the perimeter defense of Austin Reeves, LeBron, who has been better defensively over the last month, but is a step slower than he's been in years past. Some of the guys they have coming off the bench, Rui Hachimura, they're just not a very good defensive team. They're going to score a lot of points, I think, to beat some of the top tier teams in the Western Conference. The Mark Williams deal was pretty interesting. The positives of Mark Williams is that he's a great rebounder. His per 36 minutes are insane. He's 18 and 13 in his per 36. He's only averaging about 25 minutes per game this year with Charlotte. So theoretically, he's a good fit. I think offensively he's a great fit because we know from watching Luka the last couple of years with Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford, you put a guy that can catch lobs around Luka, that guy's going to get 10 points per game just off lobs. So I think that makes a lot of sense opposite Luka. I think the question I have with Mark Williams is how good is he defensively? He's a decent shot blocker. I think a block and a half per game in Charlotte. He's really good with contests. He averages, I think, 10 shots contested per game, which is in that Rudy Gobert, Victor Wembanyama, Anthony Davis range. So he chases shots when they're around the rim. He's aggressive at going after it. But he is incredibly injury prone. Has not played, I think, even as much as half a season in his first 3 years in the NBA. And when I talk to some coaches about Williams, who, look, he plays for Charlotte, so I don't watch all their games. I try to watch some of them, but I don't get to watch all their games. When I talk to coaches about Williams, they also kind of say the same thing. Gets to shots, great rebounder, some questions about his motor. And I always get a little leery when there are questions, a guy coming from a really bad team that has questions about his motor. Now, Mark Williams is a young guy. He'll been in the league for 2.5 years. So certainly room to grow as a player. But the Lakers have a guy on their roster named Christian Wood, who kind of fits that Mark Williams mold, where when Christian Wood was playing on bad teams, including Charlotte, but when he was playing on bad teams, he put up some real numbers. Like Christian Wood's last year with the Dallas Mavericks, he averaged 18 and 8. He put up good numbers, but he gets to a winning situation like Los Angeles, and he can't find a role in the rotation because he's not playing great defense. So my question is going to be with Mark Williams. Yeah, he can probably block some shots with the Lakers, and he'll certainly be effective offensively off lobs. But can he be a solid on-ball defender, a solid team defender? He's not going to be Anthony Davis. Nobody's Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis is elite when it comes to defense. But can he be the anchor of your defense? Or is he just going to be a guy that catches lobs on the offensive end and blocks a few shots and contests a few shots on the defensive end? Because some of the games I've seen Mark Williams play, including against the Lakers, Anthony Davis cooked him.
Yeah, 42 points or something in that game.
You go back, I don't know when it was, but it was within a few weeks prior. Nikola Vucevic had a great game against him. So you can't have him giving up a lot of points on that end of the floor. So I like the deal in theory. It's a young guy that fits the timeline of Luka Doncic, who also offensively fits opposite Luka. But I think the jury's out on whether or not Mark Williams is a good enough defender to be a reliable starter on a team with aspirations to win something.
Did you have any inkling that's the direction that they might head? Because I got to be honest, I heard a lot of names thrown around. Mark Williams was not one of them in terms of centers that they might go hunting for. So it took me a little bit by surprise, not just because of who it was, but because on the opposite side of that trade, I found it curious that Charlotte would give up a center when the front court is the weaker area for them. On top of that, I as much as Dalton Connect has been good, it's yet another guy who's primarily offensively focused on that team that I guess maybe they just don't care and it's a cobbled together talent situation. But do you think that made sense for Charlotte to do on their end?
I like to pour one out for Dalton Connect, who probably bought himself a nice place on Manhattan Beach 6 months ago and is
Well,
now.
don't buy anything your rookie. Well, I guess you would think buying property your rookie year maybe would be safer. How many teams come off their guy in the first year of a contract? That's
especially
pretty
when you're LeBron's favorite college player like that. It's a tough pill
fickle thing keeping LeBron happy, Chris.
Tough pill for Dalton Connect to swallow there. I like the deal a lot for the Hornets. Look, they're Jeff Peterson's in his first year as the GM, so he's basically starting with a blank slate. He didn't draft Mark Williams. They know more than everybody about Mark Williams and what he is and what he could potentially be. So moving off of him and getting a elite shooting prospect like a Dalton Connect, plus that 2031 first round pick. That 2031 first round pick is a major asset. I mean, honestly, like it's so far away, 6 years away, the Hornets aren't thinking about using it. They're thinking like 2 years down the line when LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller and hopefully Dalton Connect are more mature and helping them compete for a play-in spot and a playoff spot. They can take that pick and give it to somebody else that will send them back a veteran that makes sense for them in return. So I do that deal all day long if I'm the Hornets. The Lakers, I didn't think Williams was the guy they were looking at first. I mean, actually, I thought Robert Williams was the guy that they were going to be more focused on because he makes sense, right? Like Robert Williams is the same kind of springy, offensive lob catcher that Mark Williams is. Robert Williams is also a great defensive player when he's healthy. Like, when Marcus Smart won that Defensive Player of the Year in 2022, Robert Williams was right there with him. He was just as much a reason Boston was a great defense that year as Marcus Smart was. But, Portland, I think if you had tried to acquire Robert Williams like 4 weeks ago, you might have had more success.
Talk about a team that's thriving right now.
It's incredible. Like, I'd love to give Joe Cronin, the GM, sodium penthol and say, do you like this? Like, because I know you want Cooper Flagg, because I know in those hallways, before the season, they were eyeballing Cooper Flagg. He was a priority for them. Now, they might still wind up in that mix, but they're playing great right now. And so I think the Blazers, because they didn't do anything at the deadline, didn't deal anybody. I think they wanted to let the good times roll there and see what they could do with that group for the rest of the season. So I thought that Robert Williams made some sense. Vucevic, after they made this Luka deal, they didn't really have the pieces to make something like that work. Walker Kessler was somebody that they were interested in.
That's who I thought, because of the foreshadowing at the press conference for Luka. They asked Pelinka about, okay, what do you want to do as far as somebody in the pivot? And he went out of his way to say, I want to get somebody on the same timeline. So then I started to abandon these thoughts of, the Miles Turners, the Jakob Poeltls. But I thought Kessler for sure was somebody they would maybe go after, because
the asking price though.
Yeah.
I didn't hear any
situation. You're not going to get anybody cheap.
I didn't hear any real substantive talk about a Walker Kessler deal, because I think the asking price would have been a couple of first round picks.
Yeah.
And the Lakers certainly didn't have that to offer in a deal like this. I mean, Danny Ainge, I've covered him for a very long time. Like, most of his deals are done with teams that reek of desperation. I mean, just look at some of the deals he made with Boston.
True, Chris. Know your audience. Know who you're talking to right now, Chris.
I mean, really, that is the way it goes. Like he does these deals, with the Rudy Gobert deal, with Minnesota, desperate. Cleveland had to do something, and it worked out for the Cavs. I mean, sometimes it works out for both teams, but I think the Jazz needed to do what they needed to do in that situation as well. But between the Nets, the Cavs, the Timberwolves, like he gets 150 or $1.50 on the dollar for most of the deals that he makes. I don't think the Lakers were in that position where they were so desperate this year that they were going to go all in for Walker Kessler. So Mark Williams was the next best option. Again, they gave up a lot. Like, they gave up a lot of assets. Dalton Connect, I think, he was much better as a rookie than I thought he was going to be. Like, this is like the 17th pick in the draft. He got off to a great start to the year. His defense stinks, but that could potentially get better as he gets a little bit older. He fits in with what Charlotte is trying to do with their guys. So they gave up a lot, and I think it will pay off if it turns out, to bring it full circle, it'll pay off if it turns out that Mark Williams is a average to above average on-ball defender. If he can do that, everything else that we know that he does will make him a huge value.
Well, I don't know if you caught Dan Patrick's take on the whole trade, but his take was, wait, Mark Williams came out after his sophomore year. I don't trust him then. If he was not good enough to come out after his freshman year, I don't think it's going to work out. I realize that's a pretty simple way to view it, but I thought it was amusing that was his 2-second take on.
I think it's not apples to apples, but when you have these guys that put up numbers on bad teams, you always have to look at those numbers through the right lens.
And skepticism. I mean, honestly, when I watch Charlotte, I like Diabate. I think his hustle and his energy, there's times where I say, I know that guy's just been a journeyman throwaway guy in a lot of different deals, but he plays with such heart in a way that when I see Williams, he has all the physical tools. But I have the same kind of skepticism because I've seen him in games against us where it's like, yeah, he might wreak some havoc on the boards, but beyond that, it's not something that I've ever been that worried about. I think what surprised me with the Lakers end of it is, I thought they might try to hold back Connect, use the pick to get somebody who's maybe not on a rookie deal, so he doesn't have quite as much value, because there's like a utility function with a center who's playing alongside those guys, where you're not asking for somebody to be putting up, Mark Williams and Charlotte numbers. You're asking someone to do a very specific purpose, which I think a lot of times you can get at a much lower replacement value. So
yeah, I do think that if Robert Williams was available to them, that would have been the way that they would have gone. And again, like Portland, they made some interesting decisions over the last 4 or 5 years. They clearly just want to ride this thing out with this group and see if they can make, this lightning in a bottle they seem to have caught, see if it could stretch out over 2 more months. I think, Mark Williams, fits the timeline more than Robert Williams does, if we're being honest. Like, Robert Williams a little bit on the older side now, and he's perpetually injured. That's another problem with him. I mean, so is Mark Williams, I guess. But, getting Mark Williams at 22, 23, whatever he is at this point, I can see the logic in it. I'll say that.
Now, Chris, you brought up Danny Ainge, and that brings me to something. This is going to be a rough segue, but you're used to just having random opens thrown at you when you would fill in for Dan. So this is going to be very similar to that. We have this Discord for the Fear the Fro podcast, and when you told me that you would in fact come on, I put the question to them, okay, what do you want to know from Chris Mannix? And people send in these audio submissions to the audio mailbag. So I'm going to play one of those for you right now. Now, you're not going to like this. It's going to put you on your back foot, but I'm giving you fair warning that this is a bit of an adversarial Fear the Fro mailbag here. So I'll play this for you with a little intro because, that's what I do.
Please leave a message.
And now a message recorded and submitted to me at CavsPod.com.
Hey, Bob. Brett Clapper here from Seattle. I heard you had Chris Mannix coming on the show, and I don't know if you remember this, but a few years back, he had an anonymous scout source from the league that he was dropping some insights, and Chris Mannix printed an article for SI, and in it, this anonymous scout called Colin Sexton an asshole. So if you get a chance, I would love you to ask Chris Mannix, who was the source that called Colin Sexton an asshole, and why did you feel comfortable printing that?
No chance I reveal the source for that. I've been doing these anonymous scout takes for almost 20 years now. I would say I usually, in the case of that, I always take an assistant coach or advanced scout from a team in the division because I want to get as close to someone that has a bird's eye view of each team as I possibly can. That's probably as close as I'm going to come to revealing who the source is on that. I mean, these things, I get more irritated feedback from agents, from executives, from coaches based on these scouts takes because they do have my byline on them technically because I piece them together. But we've just decided years ago, if we're talking to somebody that we believe has knowledge of the situation, is knowledgeable about what's going on in a certain situation, we let them say what they want. Like that's the whole point. It's an anonymous scouts take, and it's not a novel concept. We do it in basketball, football, baseball, all of them. So that's kind of the rationale. If I believed, and I clearly did believe, that this person knew what he was talking about when it comes to the Cavaliers, I'm going to let him say what he wants.
Okay. Well, the reason why I thought that one was weird was because saying somebody doesn't fit with a team is an observation you can make from the outside. But to say somebody's an asshole as a scout or another team is like, how would you be able to speak to his personality? Unless, of course, it's like a situation where a guy who played with him came to your team, relayed the information you're delivering.
And honestly, that's often what it is. And these guys, it's a fraternity in the coaching ranks. Like you see players interact with each other before games. See coaches interact with each other before games too. Like they all talk and they all do that. I don't remember specifically kind of what I don't even remember who the coach was that I talked to for that particular year, but I'm sure he's someone that has either had somebody on his team that played in Cleveland or has a close relationship with somebody that works on the Cleveland staff or worked in the Cleveland staff.
Well, I sort of hold you responsible for diminishing his trade value. I don't think we would have had to give up Lauri Markkanen if you hadn't run that piece saying he was an asshole. And then that wasn't enough to be the centerpiece of the Donovan Mitchell.
I love this. Is like, so earlier today, I was doing my boxing podcast and Sergio Mora, who I work with, was telling me that I'm the one that created Jake Paul because we put Jake Paul on the cover in 2022. So I'm really glad I'm being, bestowed with these powers of influence to people. Because
Lauri Markkanen would be part of a 3-tower lineup in Cleveland if not for Chris Mannix.
I'm not sure like that Lauri would have. I mean, I don't think Lauri would have broken out the way that he did in Utah.
Yeah,
that wouldn't have happened.
Can we speak to methodology stuff though? Right.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I was wondering, take the Sexton thing off the table. Let's just talk about the trade deadline. When a situation like the Cavs trade happens, I'm sure there's a lot of rumors that you hear that don't come to fruition. And then obviously ones like the Hunter one pan out. It looks great. How hesitant are you to go with sources who aren't directly related to the teams that you're reporting on?
Extremely hesitant. I give credit to the newsbreakers like Woj was for so many years, like Shams is right now. Brian Windhorst is incredibly plugged in. Even the way I go back to the Hunter framing, like I was a little, I said Cleveland's the front runner, but I tell you, I knew this was happening. Like I knew this was going down. It was just sort of a question. I mean, you saw all the things that went into that, the swaps and all that stuff. I just knew that they were going to figure it out. Like I knew it, but I still was hesitant to say this was a done deal, like that this was happening, because you never know when things could fall apart and go south. And it really is, for me, it's unless I get it from a very, very, very high source on one side or the other, I'm just not going to go with it. Like, I mean, the only other thing I reported on early in the trade deadline process was the Durant stuff. And because I had been hearing pretty specifically that there were talks about Durant, that Golden State was aggressively, this was going back to like Monday before it really started to pop, but Golden State was aggressively looking to reunite him with Steph, and that the Suns, who had been so frustrated by the inability to do anything with Bradley Beal. Forget the getting him to waive his no trade clause. They didn't even get to that point. They couldn't get him, get a deal for him because nobody wanted to absorb the last 2 years of that contract. But I knew that was going down, so I was comfortable writing about it. I knew the Hunter deal was going down, so I was comfortable tweeting about it. I mean, I don't think there's it's not like you talk to only one specific person and that's the only one you're going to run with, but I got to be 100% if I'm going to put anything out there, because that's just not really my game. I'm not, I'll break a little bit of news here or there, but I'm, those newsbreakers, they're an entity unto themselves. That's for sure.
Is it, and this is just a question from the outside, how frequent is it that an agent gets involved in leaking information about a trade before it's culminated? Is that, are rumors usually coming from the front office side more, or is there an equal kind of distribution of you catch wind of things from the player side sometimes?
I think it's an equal distribution because, as agents talk to the front office about their guys all the time, just checking in to see what's happening. Obviously, when a deal is close to going down, the agent usually gets alerted. We saw that with the Luka deal. Bill Duffy was the first one to know before Luka found out about it. So yeah, it does. It cuts both ways there with the agent and with the team as far as this stuff goes. With me, like I'd need to yeah, again, I just need to be 1,000% sure that what's happening is going to happen, even to like float out the possibility. Like the last thing I'd want to do, and it's happened in the past, I'll admit that, like you don't want to put something out there that you heard from a third-hand source that turns out to be complete bullshit. Like you just, that's the worst feeling in the world when you hear from somebody at Summer League, like, hey man, you wrote that, thing about my guy, and we had no intention of doing that. Like that was never even a discussion. And you want to, and hopefully they're being truthful with you there, because right now, like now we're in that week, Bob, where it's like none of the chatter that was actually happening is really happening. I saw some people out there saying like Kevin Durant was never on the table. That was never discussed. Like, come on, give me a break. Like, of course it was. In fact, I'm of the belief that had the Houston Rockets shown more interest in Kevin Durant, that he would have been there. I mean, the Houston Rockets are a great team for Phoenix to deal with, because the Houston Rockets have a lot of the draft capital that the Phoenix Suns want back, because of all the deals that have been made involving James Harden and others over the years. So, but the Rockets, they stuck to their guns over this trade deadline. They said, we're not breaking up this group until we see what it looks like in the playoffs. And if we are going to break up this group, it's only going to be for a guy that fits our timeline. Kevin Durant at 36 years old just does not fit the Houston Rockets timeline. I think it was appealing. I do. I haven't talked to Kevin about this. I was in Oklahoma for that game against the Suns, but he didn't play. But I'd imagine that going back to Texas, where he played his college season, playing for Ime Udoka, who he played for in Brooklyn for that 1 year, and being like the veteran closer on a team of dogs, like defensive-minded, scrappy guys with real talent. I got to imagine that would have been an appealing destination for Kevin Durant.
Yeah, that would have been terrifying based on we saw them twice recently. They beat us both times, and that was a physical team. And to see what's happening with Ahmed in the absence of Jabari here, it just makes you wonder, with all the assets they still have. I mean, obviously, Oklahoma City is the team everybody talks about this unlimited runway. Houston's in a great position themselves. So how did you feel about how it all played out in terms of with Golden State and landing Jimmy Butler?
I mean, I get what they're doing, and I do think it makes them a little bit better. I think Jimmy Butler is going to play those non-Steph Curry minutes better than some other guys have done it. Like Dennis Schroeder came in, and I get why they did that deal too. Dennis was playing great for Brooklyn. It didn't work. His shooting numbers cratered in Golden State. They weren't winning the non-Steph minutes. In fact, they were losing them pretty badly. They had to shake things up. So I think getting Jimmy, you're going to get the best of him. Like you're going to get super motivated Jimmy Butler to prove Miami doesn't know what they're doing, and all that stuff. I think getting him gives them a boost. I do worry though about the fit in a postseason series. You're now looking at a starting lineup of the greatest three-point shooter of all time in Steph Curry, maybe the streakiest three-point shooter of all time in Buddy Hield, and Jimmy and Draymond Green, who are not three-point shooters. So, if the shooting goes cold around Steph Curry, this is a team that could go south in a playoff series pretty quickly. So I think it's a calculated risk, and I get why they took it. But I don't look at this deal as saying like, all right, well, this bumps the Warriors up to that, even that second tier in the Western Conference. Like they're not on the Houston, the Memphis, the Nuggets level right now, much less Oklahoma City's.
Yeah, I was happy. And I don't think it'll work ultimately to get to them into title contention, but even just aligning the end of Steph's contract with Jimmy's and holding on to the young assets, I think it's a risk worth taking. Was there an unheralded move? What was your favorite kind of under the radar move from the trade deadline, whether it be a financial maneuver or, jumping in on somebody else's deal? Was there anything that jumped out to you as, well, this isn't grabbing the headlines, but I like this a lot?
I tell you, I loved Toronto getting Brandon Ingram. And I'm a little surprised that most people have been so lukewarm about it. I get that Ingram has been injury prone the last few years. There's only 1 year he's played like more than 55 games. And this year has been a disaster, like for everybody in New Orleans, but for Brandon Ingram included. But if you're Toronto and you have a chance to get a 27-year-old efficient 20-point per game scorer who plays a wing position, you do it all day long. Toronto doesn't get free agents. It's a beautiful city. for like the summer months. The winter months, it's cold as hell. And so a lot of guys don't want to go and play in Canada too. So, they don't get marquee free agents signing up in Toronto. They got to go out and acquire them. And I'm sure the Raptors did this deal knowing exactly what it's going to take to keep Brandon Ingram long-term. I think he's going to be there. So now you have Brandon Ingram, you have Scotty Barnes, you've got RJ Barrett, you've got Grady Dick, you've got, Emmanuel Quickly, you've got a bunch of kind of 6'4" to 6'8" guys that can do a bunch of different things. And I think specifically with Ingram, I think he's going to complement the playmaking of Barnes. I think he's a nice fit next to Scotty Barnes. So I think that he's going to have to prove he can stay healthy. But when he's out there on the floor, he's not Jason Tatum, but like poor man's Jason Tatum is probably a reasonable comparison there. So I think getting a guy like that for really what was a first round pick. I mean, it was Bruce Brown's expiring contract. Kelly Olynyk has 1 year left in his deal. It really was one first round pick you're trading to get Brandon Ingram. I would do that deal all day long. And I think they look great making that deal.
See, my take on that was it's kind of reflecting of this whole trade deadline where I don't fault them for taking a run at a guy who's at such a distressed point. And if you look at it from the standpoint of, I've heard people frame it in a way of, I have my concerns about fit. But in terms of, okay, we came off Siakam and then we essentially went to an Ingram who's younger and we flipped a lot of the assets. I think if you look at, okay, they had Jacoby Walter, they get Ingram who's a few years younger. They get him in a situation where that's the team that's essentially going to be able to pay them. So what I'm really curious to see is what the final number comes down on a Brandon Ingram, because if Siakam is making 40 mil plus and all the talk with the Pelicans was that Ingram wanted more than the 35 he's on now, I think there is a situation where you could say, okay, even if you look at them as a pass through for the Indiana assets and they do effectively swap a Pascal for a Brandon Ingram, like you said, it's not like people are banging down the door to come there. I don't think that will be the worst thing in the world to come away from this saying, because the other thing is with a Bruce Brown asset, you can't let what happened with OG and Pascal happen where you run out the clock and then you get basically nothing back. Using that salary slot to turn it into a guy who has legitimate talent is
and from what I hear, I think they're going to get Ingram on a decent number. It's going to be a high number. Like you're going to look at it and say, is he really worth that? But I don't think it's not going to be max, obviously. And I think it'll be enough under the max to make you believe that it's worth the risk to take. Because if he can ever stay on the floor and rediscover that 20 to 25 point per game score, he's going to add a lot to the Raptors. I also would add, like, it's not just this Ingram deal. Like, to me, this Raptors draft is the most important draft in franchise history because they need a star. And Scotty Barnes is an all-star level guy. Brandon Ingram is an all-star level guy. But neither one of them, I think, has the ceiling of a superstar. They need to get somebody in this draft that has that ceiling, somebody they could add to this mix of talent that can develop into the number one guy on this team. And there'll be somebody, like they're going to wind up drafting inside that top 10. There'll be somebody there outside of the top 2 that turns out to be a great player. They've got to find that player and make sure they don't miss on it.
Well, okay, so OG Anunoby goes to New York. He signs for $42.5 million average annual value. In a vacuum, would you rather have Brandon Ingram at that number or OG Anunoby at that number?
It's tough because I love OG. I think, but I think you're gonna get Brandon Ingram at a lesser number though. Is the point?
You think he'll come in under 40?
Yeah, and that's just a guess right now. I don't. Teams don't make deals like this unless they've had back channel conversations with an agent about what it's going to take. Right? Like I think the Raptors get that. I think it'll come under. It'll be between 30 and 40, which is a broad range. I'll give you that. But it's
no. I think if it's 35 or below, I think that's a huge win. I've been rooting. I root for chaos, Mannix, and I while I don't necessarily like Toronto, there's a part of me that feels like I would love for a team to do what they did in acquiring the rights, the bird rights for a guy who doesn't have a lot of outside dollars on the market outside of, say, like a Brooklyn. There's not a lot of teams, especially after what Washington did. They burned through their projected space, taking on Marcus Smart and Chris Middleton. I would love to see a team just kind of put the screws to some of these guys to get those secondary stars more in line, because I think what happened last summer was, it shifted to this nobody gets anything or people get everything. And that middle class is almost non-existent, it's felt like, since this new CBA hit. So I would love to see a team just take a gamble, since the asking price is so low, to essentially have to give 1 first-round pick. If you're willing, to draw out the negotiation a little, I don't think Brandon Ingram at $35 million, that's a totally palatable deal.
No, they're the perfect team to do it, because Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster, like, they don't like rebuilds. Like, they don't like where they've been the last couple of years. And they're not looking to kickstart a 4 to 5 year extended rebuild. They want to be in the playoffs next year. And I think they believe they can get Ingram all the way back, get some of these other guys healthy, that they can be in that mix next season. And then they go from there, have that high lottery pick that they can develop while they're still a playoff team. So I think they were the ideal team to take a flyer on Brandon Ingram.
Okay, I have a question for you, which we've talked about to death, but I think it's always good to get an outside perspective from somebody who doesn't spend all day obsessing about the Cavs' future cap situation. With Karis LeVert heading out, the free agents for the Cavs this summer are Sam Merrill and Ty Jerome. Now, you, as somebody who knows a lot about the Boston Celtics, realize the difficulties of navigating free agency when you're a second apron team, which the Cavaliers are just barreling towards now. What do you think a market value for a Ty Jerome player is in this environment? Knowing that we don't have his bird rights. They only have his early bird rights. So the fear is in Cleveland that you're going to run into a Hartenstein situation where if he plays well with LeVert gone, that he's going to price himself out of the early bird ceiling, which is somewhere around $12 million a season. Do you think there's any world in which you could see a 27, 28-year-old Ty Jerome just playing the Peyton Pritchard role for the Cavs and pricing himself out of the Cavs being able to retain him?
Problem is, like, making the comp with Peyton Pritchard is like the Celtics got Peyton Pritchard when he wasn't playing at that $8 million per year salary. Like, that's one of the biggest bargains in the NBA right now. Peyton Pritchard has outplayed that contract threefold. Like, if Peyton Pritchard hit the market this summer, he'd probably be worth $20 million. So yeah, it's a short. I'd have you have to, when you're thinking about stuff like this, you have to think about the landscape. Like, who would make a run at him? Who has that kind of financial flexibility to make an offer? But a guy like Ty Jerome and Sam are young enough that some of these rebuilding teams might want to do it. And as you know, 3-point shooting is the most valuable commodity in the NBA. So it might be close, but yeah, I could see for Ty Jerome, I could see a team out there. Not Hartenstein money, because that's bigger.
Well, that's ludicrous, but yeah.
Hartenstein too. Like, here's the other thing about Hartenstein. Hartenstein, he was acquired to give the Thunder exactly what he's doing. But one of the reasons I think they gave him that contract is because if they go up, I mean, they're going to at some point have to package these picks and players to do something. Like, whatever superstar becomes available. Let's say Giannis, for example. It's not going to be Giannis, but let's just say Giannis with the Bucks, with the Thunder now. You got to have somebody making a bunch of money. So, like, giving Hartenstein all that money, in a way, that was to use him as a trade chip down the line. And there is a value beyond playing to these middle-class contracts. Like, if you can get, like, Bruce Brown's a great example. If you can get a guy on
look at Sam Hauser. $11 million for him might seem exorbitant for a guy who's primarily there to shoot. But when you're a second apron team and you can't aggregate contracts, it doesn't hurt to have some people making movable deals that you can bring back people.
The second they did that Sam Hauser deal, one of my first thought was there's no way he sees the end of this contract in Boston, just because of the salary cap ramifications of having your 8th or 9th guy making that kind of
$11 million.
So no, to bring it around back, yeah, I think I could see someone going 15+ million for Ty Jerome. I'd have to dig more into it to know, but like, yeah, given the way he's played, the skill set that he has, his age, yeah, I could see it.
See, I'm skeptical, but there's the tinfoil hat, Bob, that's like, well, if somebody has money to burn in a non-taxpayer mid-level exception and you had a chance to spike a contender by taking away someone who your replacement value is a minimum contract, it'd be the most evil thing in the world, but it would be the kind of chaos that I do love, just not at our own expense. So, yeah, I kind of wanted to get your opinion on that, because I just feel like I look around the league, the TJ McConnells, the Peyton Pritchards, the guys in that high-end backup point guard spot. And I think you made a great point about Pritchard. I felt the same way. I feel like McConnell is on a deal where I'm hoping that Ty will land somewhere between 7 and 9 million. But I'm also worried because in the absence of LeVert, this is a guy who's been doing 16 and 4. Really, the benefit of the LeVert thing was that there was a little bit of a suppressant element with having him out there where you wouldn't get nights where he's constantly playing above 20 minutes because you see the value almost immediately when he does it. So I'm just hoping that people kind of chalk him off as, well, this is a product of the system thing, and that he'll fall into a number that's palatable to keep.
It's another reason why these playoffs are going to be so team shaping, right? Like, if you're the Cavaliers, you're trying to get data on your team moving forward. If you go to the finals, it's like, hell, let's do whatever we can to keep this group together. If you come up short, let's shake things up. And same thing, like if Ty Jerome and Sam Merrill and those guys come out and play lights out in the postseason, it's only going to increase their value. It's going to make a team, look at them and say, these guys are doing it in playoff games. I want to overpay to have him on my roster.
Absolutely. Well, Mannix, I've taken enough of your time. Thank you for coming on. If you haven't checked out his podcast, Open Floor, he did an NBA trade deadline recap with Rachel Nichols, which I still have to listen to. So I will be going to that. You should as well. And thank you for taking the time, Chris. I know you.
Thank your audience for reading these Scouts takes. I do.
Yeah, Brett Clapper, you're back to being the best Brett. So suck it, Brett in Houston. Brett Clapper completely ambushing Mannix out of nowhere. I love you.
Appreciate it, Bob.
All right, thanks, Chris.